Welcome, Dr. Paul Swan. It's great to be back here again to talk mathematics. And today we're going to be looking at attribute blocks, linking vocabulary with reasoning and problem solving. Now, it's interesting. My youngest son actually uses them in the early years, but they're not used as much with my oldest son, which I've noticed in the primary age. So I look forward to seeing the mathematical language, which I know that you're very passionate about, and how we use it for higher thinking, so reasoning and problem solving. So I'm not going to take much of your time. I'm going to hand it over to you. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Heather. And look, I'm just going to start with a couple of basic ideas about attribute blocks. And probably the first thing is the name. They're designed about certain attributes. So we'll talk about the language and how the blocks are named, and then the attributes will become more obvious. The first thing I should make a comment about is sometimes people mix up what they call pattern blocks with attribute blocks, and that's a fair enough thing because there are some similar shapes in there. So what I'm going to do is just show you the difference between those and just talk a little bit about that as well. So I'm just going to pick one up, for example. What I have now here is that's actually a pattern block. And you see it's got a certain thickness to it, and it's a hexagon and so forth. What confuses people a little bit is this is a wooden one. It's about 10 millimeters thick, whereas generally they now come in plastic and they're 5 millimeters thick. So this is an example of a pattern block. And in the pattern block range of materials, there's things like a trapezium or trapezoid. If you're in the US, there would be a square and so forth. But in attribute blocks, I'm going to pick up a piece here, and I'll just happen to pick up a yellow hexagon. You can see how people could get confused. But you can see, first of all, there's actually a thinness to it. And when I describe an attribute block, there are different attributes. So I'll go through them fairly quickly. So we can see that this one here, look, there is thin, but that one is thick. So one of the attributes is whether they're thin or thick, for example. Another attribute, I'll just hold onto the thick one here, is whether they're large or small. So you can have larger versions of them and smaller versions. So I'm just going to grab this one here, and you can see that there's a small version. This one happens to be thin and that one's thick. And obviously there's a color change as well. So I'll just run through the various attributes and then we'll talk about them as it is. So to describe this piece here, I would call that large. Now, the only reason I can call that large is the comparative piece is small. I'd also call this thick. Look at the comparative piece, it's thin. It's yellow and it's a hexagon. So in 4 words, I can describe any single piece in an attribute block set. So large, thick, yellow, hexagon. But if I take this piece here, it's small. It's only small because I have a comparison piece. It's thin because I've compared the thin to the thick. It's red and it's a hexagon. So it's a small, thin, red hexagon. Now, the other thing that changes with this material is the shape. So the colors remain the same, so different colors. You can have different thicknesses. That happens to be a thin one. You can have the circle in this case here, and we can talk about that being large because we've got a small one. And so basically with 4 words, we can describe any piece. So I'm just going to take us over to the other camera, and you'll just see a little bit about the sets of attribute blocks and what we can do with them. So I'll just get you to have a look now. What I have is 3 sets here. There's a very small set and good for sort of home use and so forth. The one we typically use at a school is this one here. And so that one will be a certain size. That's the one we're going to use today. But you can also get jumbo sets, really good if you're working with younger children or if you wanted to do some demonstration work. So I'm just going to put them off to one side. And we're going to put a set in here. And it's a set that I've been using. So if you just have a bit of a look, you'll see exactly what I mean about the pieces that we've been referring to here. So there's your typical set. Now, what a lot of people don't realize is even when you buy the set, doesn't matter which set you buy, they'll have some sort of template. So I'm just going to put here's one from one set. In this case, the template is actually the bottom of the box. There's a template at the bottom. So if you empty them out, which is what I'm going to do right now, then you will see that actually the bottom of the box has a template. And so instead of drawing around the pieces, you can draw around there and you'll get a better picture. And you start to see the different shapes and sizes and so forth. Now, if we look here, there's our full set. Now, for some people, the full set is a little bit too many pieces. So there's 64 pieces in a full set. And so remember, we've got 4 attributes. We've got the size, the thickness, the shape, and the color. So there's 4 aspects there. If you remove one of those, it reduces the size of the set. So for example, we took all the thick ones out, there'd only be 32 pieces. Or if you took all the large ones out, there'd only be 32 pieces. So we can make it a little bit easier for children struggling a bit, or harder by adding those extra pieces in. Now, once again, we're just going to go through the same exercise. And the idea is, once I've taught you this vocabulary, we can start to build our logic and our reasoning. Now, this piece of equipment is really about this logic and reasoning, and it really focuses us on the idea basically of how the internet works. One big sorting machine in a sense, but you need some words in order to sort. So let's just have a bit of a look here. If I'll focus you back down onto the other camera, and you'll see what I mean. So we've got some pieces here, and remembering the 4 words define a piece, and I'm just going to pick up one piece randomly. So I picked up this one here, which is the blue triangle. Now you'll notice I can't decide whether it's large or small unless I have a comparative piece. So here I have the red triangle, and it's fairly clear that one of them is larger than the other. This happens to be thick. I can only make that comparison by comparing that one's thin. And so now my 4 words to describe this piece are, it's a small, thick, blue triangle. Let's take another piece. In here, I'm going to refer to this piece because I can see what a small piece looks like. So this is going to be a large piece. That's what a small one looks like. Large, thin, yellow, square. And that's what I was about to say. There's 4 words, and those 4 words will allow us to sort any piece in the set. And you can start to see naturally there's some sorting options here. And as I said, the internet really, if you think about it, is one big sorting machine. Databases that big companies use are one big sorting machine. And what you really need to be able to do is interrogate that database or the internet and such. In order to do that, we need to understand words. Some words, very small ones, make a big difference. I'll give you an example. The word and, it's only a 3-letter word, or the word or, 2-letter word, make a big difference. And we'll talk about sorting and classifying as we go. So if we just head down here, we'll talk about a couple of ways that we could sort. Some obvious ways here. So if you can see here, I'm just sorting according to shape. So I've put all the circles there, and I might put all the triangles in a spot and so forth. Obviously, another way I could sort would be maybe color. So we might just put all the red pieces together and so forth. I might sort according to thickness. I might sort according to the size. So straight away, I've got 1 or 2 criteria. But watch what's going to happen. I'm just going to change my language a little bit, and we're going to sort according to 2 criteria. So when you think we've been sorting by 1, just by color. But now let me put 2 words together and we see what is involved. So now what I want to do is sort by color and shape. So now if I wanted to find the red triangles, I've now got 2 criteria. You must meet 2 criteria, must be red, and it must be a triangle. So watch as I do this sorting and you'll start to see how it develops. So out of here, I've got some bits and pieces. I didn't say whether it was large or thick, but all I'm looking for are triangles. So that's a red triangle. I found a triangle, but it's blue, so that one's not in, and so forth. And I start doing a sort, and you'll see there that we get down to a very small set. So in fact, if I'm going for red triangles, there aren't that many in the set. I'm just going to move these out of the way, and you'll start to see what I mean. In here, can you see there are my 4 triangles? And there's some things about them that I could sort them by. So this one here would be the large, thick, red triangle, large, thin, red triangle, small, thick, red triangle, and then the small, thin, red triangle. So that gives us that focus. Now, once we've taught those words, now in terms of the logic and the reasoning, the opportunities really become much larger. And so let me give you a few simple ideas you could do. By the way, if you don't have this sort of material, being able to sort a set of buttons come in sizes, thickness. They've got 1 hole, 2 holes, 4 holes. Some will be round, some will be triangular, some will be plastic, some will be made with cloth. Once you've established the language, you can do the sorting process. Even certain counters, for example, fruit counters. So you've got maybe in terms of your fruit, you've got the different types of fruit, bananas and apples and so forth, and there'll be different colors. Some counters come in small, medium, and large. So once again, as long as you establish the language, you can do all the sorting that's needed. So let's just go through a couple of little ideas and simple things. Now, one would be, and it's a really ideal sorting sort of idea, and I've just got here, can you start to see here, we've got two sorting circles, sometimes called grouping circles. These ones collapse in sitting in this point here, but straight away you start to get an idea of what they call a Venn diagram. And now what I'm going to do is put it onto a bit of our other camera, and you'll see what I mean about sorting with a Venn diagram. So I'm just going to put them down now, and you'll start to see that what I built in here is an overlap that happens here. And in the overlap is talking about items that are both in this set and in this set. So for example, here, we might put yellow things here. So I can put anything that's yellow. It doesn't really matter what it is. Yellow pieces might fit here, and that's fine. On this, and we might have a yellow triangle here and so forth. If the other criteria is triangles, so I can have any triangle here, then in fact, I'm going to have to shift the piece from here into here because these are yellow pieces. These are triangles. The attribute that's shared is if it is a yellow triangle. So you start to see how the sorting happens. Now, basically, that's called a Venn diagram, named after John Venn, who was a logician, not a magician, a logician. In other words, logic was the idea. Now, logic sits behind a lot of things we do, including a lot of the coding and programming that we use in when we're doing that sort of programming. Now, in here, did you notice that I used the word and? So it had one attribute linked with another one, had to have both criteria or both attributes. But without the words, that's meaningless. So we start to see how this material starts to become very sophisticated in sorting. So let's just go a couple of other places. We might head to a little bit of coding. Now, coding is often used in STEM, and I'll show you how this sort of works in this environment. So once again, all I'm going to do here is I'm going to just put a spinner in place. You may have seen these before, but literally that shows us the words that go with it. So watch how I use the spinner and how that links to the material. So we'll just put you down on the other camera as well, sitting in place here. And essentially here, this is an attribute block spinner. And you might notice now that I'm moving away from just the oral language to the written language. And here we've got two possibilities. We've got large, notice it's written in a large font, and small written in a small font. We got thick written in a thick font. Thin, you may not be able to see, it's so thin there. We've got the various colors given to us and the shapes. So for example, one little activity that I would do with children is simply to spin this up, and remembering there's 4 words to describe an individual piece. So we're looking for the large, thick, let's make sure that's yellow, hexagon. So I'm looking for large, thick, yellow hexagon. So see how there's 4 bits of information that I'm keeping in my head, and it just so happens that I found the large, thick, yellow hexagon. So those 4 bits of information work that way. Now watch what I'm going to start to do, because once we've established the language, now we can really do some seriously good mathematics that happens here. The reverse is possible. So for example, I might pick up a piece. So I've just picked up what I'm going to, it's the large, thick blue triangle. So I say to children, now can you turn the spinner to show what triangle you picked up? Because some of these will be young children, can't all write all this material. So now I'm going to turn the spinner to show the piece that I have. So I'll just get you to have a look here. So a reminder of the piece you've got. So if you just want to head down to this other camera, you'll start to see what we're going to do with that. So it's large, so I'm going to turn that to large. It's thick, it's blue, and in this case here, it's a triangle. So we've done the reverse. We picked up the piece and we coded. We literally coded what it is. Now, if you want to go further, we could have some symbols to represent large, symbol to represent thick and blue and the triangle. And we could probably use 4 letters or 4 symbols would allow us to do that. Let's just go a step further. So I'm just going to take the same idea here. Now we've already talked about 2 words. Okay, so the words that we've talked about already, and or, and how we've linked them with the colors or the shape or the thickness or the size. Now I'm going to throw another word in there that really causes children difficulty when they get to mathematics. We're going to talk about the word not, N-O-T. And simply a 3-letter word like that, if we start putting it in place, changes the nature of a question. They use it a lot in probability thinking, but we're going to use it in this case here. So I'll take you back to the spinner and see what you think about this sort of idea here. Okay, now what I'm going to say here is, and you don't have to use all this, by the way. So if there were young children, we'd cover certain parts of that spinner and only do little pieces, but I'm doing the whole lot today. So in this case here, I'm going to say the word not before every word that spins up. So if I spin up here now, I'm going to say not large. Well, if it's not large and there's only 2 choices, it must be small. Okay, spin up here, not thick, so it must be thin. Now it gets problematic. It's not yellow, so that means it could be blue or red. And if I spin here, it's not a circle, means it could be a triangle, a square, a rectangle, or a hexagon. Suddenly we've got a small, thin, blue or red, hexagon, rectangle, square, or triangle. Suddenly there's more than one answer. And so you start to see just the impact of putting the word not. Now that's quite complex because I put it in front of 4 words, but notice we're using the same cycle of words as we go. And this is the power of having correct mathematical language. It allows us to describe what we're seeing and so forth. Now it's going to take us a little bit further in this sort of idea. So in a sense, what we're building here is we're building this idea of how to sort. The sort becomes classification, and that becomes quite complex. Now I have 4 cards here, and I've just made them up. They're designed for a cooperative group situation. Now, what I mean by that is you would have 4 children. We could have pairs, but 4 children, each with a clue. And I have 4 clue cards that I have here. I'll show you them properly in a minute, but there's 4 clue cards. Now I call this little game Check the Clues. There are only 4 clues that allow us, in this case, to identify a piece. Now, the children don't see every clue. One child has 1 clue, another one has another, a bit like the Cluedo sort of thing. So there's 4 separate clues. Each child has 1. However, what they do is they share or read their clue to the group. And as a group, they work out which piece is there. Now, sometimes I call this Sherlock blocks or whatever it might be. We're trying to identify or use our powers of deduction, our reasoning, which Sherlock Holmes is well known for, to try and work out what it was. So I'm going to show you these cards in detail, but just imagine there were 4 people sitting here and I'll show you how they work. Okay, so once again, you can see this is designed for younger children to get them started, because sometimes people say, oh, young children can't use their logic and so forth. Well, I think with this piece of material and with a few extra support materials like the spinner, like these cards, you can. So imagine one child's got this clue. It is large. Notice it's written in large print. It is thick. So it's big. They can sort of guess the idea of thick. Red's pretty obvious, written in red, and it is a triangle. So now there's 4 clues. Someone reads it's large, it's thick, it's red, it's a triangle. Now, the other thing we need to do is be quite logical about which one would we start with. See, certain ones of those will knock out more options than the other. For example, if we just go for the card that says it is large, that's knocking out about 50% of your blocks. If you went for the card it is thick, that is knocking out about 50%, which is okay, makes it simpler. But actually, probably a better clue is to go for it is a triangle, because there are only 4 triangles. So what we've done is immediately, by using our thinking a little bit, by slowing it down a bit and saying, actually, it's probably more logical to start with that clue, you start to see how we can be more in the terms of problem solving. So this is like a game. Kids love this game because they're working out the clues to work out which piece is the piece referred to. But actually, if we pull it back a bit, we can say, well, was there a better way to solve that? The clue is that red is a pretty good one. So we're now getting down to it's a triangle. Red really reduces it, and we go and so forth. Let me just show you one more in this same sort of idea. As I said, I call it check the clues. So it's about getting a set of clues. By the way, when you find the piece, everybody has to read again to check that they haven't missed anything. So I'm going to show you one other example, just a different set of, same sort of idea, different set of cards. And I'm only going to show you one card. And you start to see here, we're introducing the idea of a symbol. Can you see that that's actually saying it's not large? which is similar to what we said before. So straight away, even young children can be introduced to some of the symbolic thinking in terms of mathematics. Okay, so essentially here, mathematics is full of these sort of symbols. So in terms of mathematical literacy, the language that goes around it, there are three that will have a big impact. One's obviously vocabulary, which we've talked about today. That was another one, the symbols that you have in mathematics. And a third one will be the pictures or images. So children have to sort of interpret when there's an image given in some sort of thing, or think, for example, a graph or a table. They have to get inside out and think about that a bit. Let's take this a little bit further. So I'm going to take the problem solving just a step further so you can see where it can go. Now, I'm going to set up a little task, and yeah, you'll need some blocks to do this one, but I think it's well worth thinking about a little bit. Okay, so here's my little task. It's going to be really, it's a bit of algebraic thinking that goes on here. I'm going to take a piece. Okay, the piece I happen to be taking is the large, thick, blue triangle. Now we're going to have a chain or a linking piece that goes with this, and you must have exactly two things that are different. So we want two attributes that will be different. So let me give you an example. If I went to this one here, okay, there are some things that are the same and some things that are different. So this is a large, thick blue triangle. This is a small, thick yellow triangle. So now, are there two things that are different? Well, the size is different and the color is different. So those two things could go together. Are there two things that are the same? Yeah, thickness is the same, shape is the same. Now, if we continue that way, I want you to think here. So we're putting those pieces together. Now, I'll just put it down on so you can see it on the camera, the other camera, and you'll see what I mean. Okay, at this point here, what we've got here is there's a linking rule. And the linking rule is there are exactly two things that are different. Now, if I continue going this way, is there a piece that I could put here? Well, let's just think about it. Okay, so now let's run through our thinking. We have to use the language we've learned. Okay, so that's a thin piece, so that's different. It's red, that's different. The color is the same, the shape is the same, so that's got two differences. Well, this is a bit lazy. I've stuck to the same shape. What if I change the shape? What things might happen? Well, let's have a look here. I'm going to change the shape. Let me just try something here. Let's be logical about it. So now we change the shape. Okay, well, it's thin, so that's the same. The color's the same. The shape is different, but the size is the same. So that one doesn't fit. How could I change it? Well, let me move this piece out. Let me think about this one. This is thick. So now let's think about it. That was thin. This is thick. This is a triangle. This is a circle. So there's two differences. Well, the size is the same and the color is the same. And you start to see how this could go. Now, it can go around this end as well. We could start putting pieces there and you start to see the really logical thinking that's happening. Now, I think with a set of 64 attribute blocks, you can go all the way around and they would link back together. Not only that, it doesn't always have to be the same. That'll look different the next time you do it. So you start to see how this begins to stretch your thinking and how that sort of develops that and sits here. Now, of course, other things that you can do with attribute blocks would be things like a matrix. You can start to use some symbols. You can talk about there being one difference and two difference. There's a number of cards around and so forth. Obviously, I've written a book on the topic, so I like them a lot. But people find them a little bit confusing simply because at the very first time they open them up, they need to think about those words to name them. The other thing that I find confusing, remember, is that they mix them up with the pattern blocks. So pattern blocks can be in a tub separate. My recommendation always will be that you put your attribute blocks back in the box. In fact, what I've done here is actually laminated this box so it slides on and they pack away back into the box, right? And that way you check that you've got them all. Now, even getting them in and out of the box makes a difference. And one last reminder, remember that I said there's a template here. So if you wanted to draw it, you can draw inside the template rather than sort of go across your blocks. I see lots of lovely blocks and someone's drawn it with a texture and gone across the top. It just messes them up a little bit. That's it. And as I said, this is the basis of other ideas. So if you ever played the game Guess Who's about the attributes. You can get attributes. I said you can sort anything by shape and color and size, including certain types of counters. You can sort buttons, you can sort nuts and bolts that go together. But the key part with any sorting is to establish what the language is first, like I did before when I talked about it being a large, thick, red triangle. So hopefully there's a few thoughts for getting the maximum out of it. As I said, you can go right through to secondary school with this, particularly when you use the matrix sort of thinking. But hopefully that gives a bit of an overview of how you might use attribute blocks. So hopefully that's useful to you, Heather, and your children as well.
Hi, Paul. Thank you so much for that. That was great, breaking down the language, the vocabulary, symbols, and images. Also, what I love, I know you're very passionate about, you have a book, don't you, on the language of mathematics? Is that
Yeah,
correct?
well, it's interesting. Yeah, sort of probably too passionate about it. I've got a word list, 2 different dictionaries. We've written one for younger children called a Junior Illustrated Dictionary. And the idea is that as children's understanding of vocabulary develops, they can write extra bits in where they know that, for example, hexagon. One of the things I like them to put in there is where they fit in the real world, like a beehive. And as they get older, they'll understand why beehives, this sort of shape will tessellate, so it fits together nicely. So as children's understanding develops, they can expand their vocabulary, really.
They are all available on your website, is that correct?
Yes. And I'm pretty sure EDX has now got the Junior Illustrated Dictionary. I saw it in their latest catalogue. So I'm very grateful for that.
Fantastic. But is it available e-resources?
May not be yet, but we're working on that pretty heavily, particularly as people in various lockdowns and so forth. They obviously need to get resources easily. So we're doing our best to get as much as we can in that form.
Thank you so much, Paul. I love the one big sorting machine, the internet. That's going to break it down for my children and also for other people easily, but also the progression from sorting and patterning to coding and STEM and the higher order thinking, reasoning, cognitive development for children. So it's a different way to look at a simple a maths manipulative. So thank you again to your team and for yourself. It's going to be available on the Dr. Paul Swan YouTube channel and EDX Education's YouTube channel. And we look forward to doing the next webinar with you. Thank you very much, Paul.
Thanks, Heather.